chant that's in the chat. The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. So at least for those attending the talk on Zoom, I recognize everyone here. Just in case for YouTube, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sarah. My Dharma name is Dōjin, and I use the pronouns she and her. And I'm one of the head priests at Stone Creek. And today I'd like to talk about, I'd like to share, actually, give me 1 second here. Let's do that. I'm going to do this view. Okay. I've been thinking and actually feeling and experiencing in different ways grieving. The capacity to grieve is an essential skill in our time of humanity. And I was working for several weeks on a talk about that. And then last Thursday, I had the opportunity to go to a talk by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote the book Braiding Sweetgrass. I mean, I went to the talk on Zoom. Do people know this book? I know a lot of people in our Sangha have read it, actually, and we read it as part of the racial literacy group. It's a really beautiful book. I really recommend it. And interestingly, I thought kind of awesomely, our daughter, who has just started as a freshman at NYU, they had it as the community book for everyone to read over the summer, and then had Robin Wall Kimmerer come and give a talk about it. So the book is Braiding Sweetgrass, and in her talk, so she's Robin Wall Kimmerer is a very important and impactful teacher of our time, actually. She's part of the Anishinaabe Nation, and she offered a couple stories, a couple stories, but also a prophecy that comes from the Anishinaabe, it was so impactful for me that I wanted to, and it seems so related to practice to me that I wanted to bring it today. And in some ways, it's because I realized that this idea about the capacity to grieve, like grieving is a vast thing. It's a complicated, it's not a thing, you know. Grieving is our processes, you know. One aspect of that is naming and clarifying and looking for ourselves at what our losses are. And I think actually in grief counseling, acknowledging the grief, like fully acknowledging grief or the loss, is often seen as the, quote, the first task of grieving. And so her story really resonated for me, and also resonated with a Zen teaching that I'll share. This prophecy is not really mine to share, actually, so that's why I want to couch it in. I'm not from the Anishinaabe Nation. But she does offer it, and actually there's even a Wikipedia page about this. So I offer it with tremendous respect and gratitude, and in the spirit that she offered it, which is there's a teaching here for everybody in this time. The prophecy is called the prophecy of the 7 fires and the people of the 7th fire. And I'll try to just stick to what she said as closely as I can, also out of respect for her and the nation from which it comes. So this comes from a long time ago. And actually, it sounds like, then reading more about it, it originated within the Anishinaabe Nation of people. But then over the centuries since, the story has also met with similar prophecies from other indigenous nations. and kind of blended with other stories. But she said from this original story, there was a great teacher in that time, and that person said a group of people from the Anishinaabe Nation need to branch off and move, and it began a migration of some of the people from that nation that originally started at the mouth of what we now call the St. Lawrence River, down the river and like into what we now call, or what is now more commonly known as the like the upper Midwest of the United States, in Michigan and Illinois and Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it named that there will be a time in the future when it will be when the people will no longer be able to dip a cup into a stream and drink from it. Like the waters will be poisoned. And the air will be thick and it will be hard to breathe. And there's some other, I think there was also a piece about, and there will be people on Turtle Island. So Turtle Island is a translation of the Anishinaabe word for what they called all of North America. There were people of different hues and from different places on Turtle Island. And when that time comes, humanity will be at a crossroads. And there's a lot of indications that we are now in that time. And at this crossroad, there will be two paths in front of us. And one path, in front of all human beings, one path will be green and lush, and you could walk on it with bare feet, and the ground is soft. And the other path will be charred and darkened by fire, and it would cut your feet to walk on it. And you know, when I heard that, I was like, it's obvious, right? What path does humanity want to walk down? Do we want to walk down the path of death or of life? You know, but the teaching is, and this is the part that I think is so important, and especially for us who are Zen students, the teaching is that in order to move forward at that crossroads, the people backward and look at what's come before us, before now. That the only way to move forward at that crossroads will be doing this, you know, very courageous and thorough act of turning around and acknowledging what came before us, before now. And in the book Braiding Sweetgrass, it seems like it's both, you know, acknowledging what we carry, like how do we get here, but also acknowledging that there are teachings and ways of being in the past that we need to re-encounter. That there's wisdom from the past that can teach us in the present. And when I heard this in that talk on Thursday, it reminded me of a teaching that's very, it's a big one in Zen. And it comes from the Fukan Zazengi, which is Dogen Zenji, so Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen in 13th century Japan. I think my understanding is he wrote this piece of writing for lay students to teach about what Zazen is. And it's actually quite beautiful. We don't chant it very much at Stone Creek. I feel like maybe there was one sesshin where we did. And in Fukan Zazengi, he says, you should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding and pursuing words and following after speech, and learn to take the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate yourself. Your body and mind of themselves will drop away and your original face will manifest. If you want to attain suchness, you should practice suchness without delay. And this idea, this image, actually for me over the years, we used to chant this pretty frequently at Tassajara. There was this image of turning the light of awareness around and inward. And that's what came to my heart when I heard this idea of, like, at this crossroads, turn around and look and see how did we get here? And also I hear in Dogen Zenji's is like, and if we do this thoroughly, if we turn and can reckon with ourselves thoroughly and honestly and fully, our original face is manifest, right? So there's like innate wisdom and innate suchness our innate Buddha nature could be a guiding possibility. In the same way that, there may be wisdom from the past that we need to return to now. So the way I hear these great teachings coming together is, on every level, from individual to collective. It's now time for us to turn inwardly and illuminate ourselves with wisdom and understand how, quote, we got here from everything, from the we being the many beings, the many facets of ourselves that we carry and the many experiences we carry as an individual human being, and then also we as a collective body of beings. The last time I spoke, I was talking about feedback and Sangha, and it occurs to me so often lately that the earth is offering us quite a lot of feedback. She's saying, hey, this path we've been on now isn't working. But for us to receive that feedback and to make use of it and to move forward skillfully and effectively and in transformation, we have to be willing to be like, wait, how did we get here? How did we even get here? How did I get here, and how did we get here? A couple weeks ago, I couldn't really attend the talk. Charlie was attending another talk on Zoom, which was happening at the Union Theological Seminary, and it was called Just Relationship with Earth. And but I was coming in and out of the room, and so I heard all these little nuggets of wisdom. I'll have to go back and see if there's a recording of it so I could hear the whole thing. One of the things I heard was a really wonderful Zen, she's a Rinzai Zen teacher named Kriti Kanko. And if you haven't encountered her teachings, I recommend checking her out. She's a climate scientist and a Rinzai priest. And she's also somebody who teaches a lot about grief and its role in our time. And she was saying that wild animals only make up 4% of the world's mammals. And I'm sure she said some other statistic. I just kind of walked through the room as she said that. So I went to look this up because I was curious about, like, well, what does that mean? And in terms of statistics that we have right now, wild animals are about 4% of the world's mammals. Humans are 34%, and livestock are 62%. So human kind of engineered and domesticated animals. And I also found, I'll put this in the chat, that also led me to this article in The Guardian, and it's from 2018, so it's several years old now. And it says that so this was 3 years ago, the world's 7.6 billion people represent just 0.01% of all living things. I think bacteria is really the biggest living thing, and then plants. But human beings are only 0.01% of all living things. But since the dawn of human civilization, humanity has caused the loss of 83% of all wild animals and half the plants. That's devastating. It's devastating. And of course, this has happened over generations, and no one person's responsible. But the thing that's just so present in my heart lately is, like, maybe what we were all born for is to do the work of feeling the pain that people have not yet been able to feel. And especially if we're going to receive the feedback from the earth. Maybe that's what we are born for. Robin Wall Kimmerer talked about the time of the great error. The great error is the time that we're in. It's, in some respects, only the last several hundred years, when human supremacy, the need of human beings over other beings, has been so elevated by human beings. So there's a way of thinking about the world where elevating human needs and desires and wants is a predominant way of thinking that it's okay to do that. And this is a great error. And even before I heard her talk, I was contemplating this thing that I wanted to share, which was allowing myself. I try, there's a part of me that's just like super pragmatic and is like, don't, what's the point of grieving for things that never were? So in my lifetime, I have stopped myself from grieving from things that never were. In my personal life, I can name, like, for a long time, I would, because my mother died when I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, I would feel the absence of my mother in my present life. And then a part of my mind would say, yeah, but she was never in this part of your life, so you can't really miss her being here. Until I matured enough to realize, like, yes, I can. And yes, I do. My mother never knew my children, but I miss her being in their lives every day. Like and opening to that was actually not a path of self-wallowing and destruction. That was a path of me maturing and that tenderizing my heart. Like, oh, no, this never was, and I grieve it still. And so in terms of ecological disaster, I opened my heart and was feeling into the grief of all the wisdom that wasn't along the way. And the way I was really feeling this was, the way that it was grief for the fact that a dominant way of being had become this great error, um, had become this idea that human needs and desires were like, it's fine, just have, if you want something, just take it. If you want something from the earth, just take it. If you want electricity, you can just rip that oil out of the ground and burn all that coal. And that's one way of thinking. And it actually, and the pain and the grief of like that has become in many parts of the world the dominant way of thinking. And then I could also feel, once I opened to the pain of that, I was like, I also am aware that it's not human nature, because there have been many civilizations that don't think that way. Right here in California, for thousands of years, there were indigenous people living with a different mindset and a different orientation than one of domination and extraction. There were people, many people in the Bay Area was a very populated place before settler colonialism in the United States and what we now call the United States. There were thousands and thousands of people, but there was mindsets, and they were different. It's not that all indigenous people had the same mindset by any means, but there were predominant ideas about living in balance and in relationship, and living also in relationship to other beings, water beings and plant beings and animal beings and soil beings and spirit beings and air beings and bird beings. And so I just let myself imagine, what if a white, European person, descendant person, coming to California, to settle some land. Well, I think it's easy enough, maybe for me anyway, it's easy to imagine, and I've read stories and heard tales of many white settler colonial folks coming to land at different parts of the United States and being told by the people in power, like, well, this is, they bought the land, or they were assigned the land, or whatever, or they settled on it, and so they claimed it. And it's like, do whatever you want. Once that's your land, you can do whatever you want. And so there was a dominant, there was a movement of take whatever you want from that land. But I just let myself have the fantasy of what would it have been like if the dominant movement was people, moving across settler folks moving across the United States, but somehow they weren't that way, which I realize is, a naive and impossible idea, because the fact that they were moving that way, like all these conditions about, Christianity and the doctrine of discovery, and there's a lot of complicated reasons why people were moving across this land and being like, that's going to be mine. But anyway, let's just picture for a moment. Somebody comes to a clearing in a forest and their intention is to set up a life there. And that many people, thousands and thousands, the dominant thinking was, if I'm going to live here, how can I and my people live in relationship to all that's here? And I spent a couple of weeks doing this, so I was just picturing, like, what would Sebastopol, for example, look like if that had been the dominant inquiry along the way? Would the redwoods still be like miles in to the land like they once were? I'm imagining my house that I abide in right now wouldn't even be here. But what would it be? What would this land be? Who would we be? Where would we be? If there was a dominant idea, if there was a wisdom inquiry, how do I live in balance and in relationship? How do I take care of the ones who came before me? How do I take care of the ones who are here now? How do I take care of the ones who are going to come in the future? And how do I live in mutual benefit with all those beings? And letting myself do that imagination opened in my heart a feeling that I have, which is that it's not our natural way of being to be dominating and extractive as human beings. That there's a part of us that actually, that I'm pretty sure we're more naturally inclined to be in balance with our environment, to feel ourselves a part of it, and that this disconnection from the environments around us that have been a big part of capitalist and kind of white supremacy and patriarchal dominant culture, that rifting has harmed us because it's not our natural way of being. So that's just one example of something that I feel is important to do as human beings, which and is important to do in developing the capacity to grieve, which is to name the pain of the losses that we feel, to name and acknowledge and actually, and then to feel them and to not dismiss them. I think truthfully, I've felt that pain, if I'm on pain that I'm describing, of things not being that way since I was a really little child. But I always would dismiss that pain with, like, well, but that's not the way the world is. I was told things like that. That's not the way the world is. The world's not like that. And then the modern world, we don't wonder about the spirits in the forest or whatever. That's not scientific or whatever. All these messages of, like, that's not the way the world is. And I think it's really liberating to be like, well, but it weighs on my heart. And if I'm honest, it's there and it colors my world. So can I own it? It's one of the things, if I do the backward step, that I can see. Like, oh, this pains me all the time. I had this opportunity along with Chris Fortin, who's some of you know, who's also a Zen priest in Sebastopol, to do there was a gathering of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, which is mostly a convert Buddhist, not exclusively, but mostly convert Buddhist priests from around the United States and some from around the world. So it was a bunch of priests, Soto Zen priests. And we got to do a grief ritual in the midst of this gathering. And I was like, yeah, yes. Because one of the things that's so present for me lately is, like, can we start to include our grief now? all the time with one another, with ourselves and then with one another. And as priests, I think, priests are often called to be with people in crisis and in loss. And I think it's really a very particular kind of skill for priests to be attuned to the losses we're working with, both the big and obvious ones, but also the more subtle ones. And and as I was thinking about that, it was so present for me that, and here's a place where I see these teachings of like that Anishinaabe prophecy and Zen teaching coming together is like, because when we can grieve and allow ourselves to do that and acknowledge what it is to be grieving and to feel losses, we are intimate with impermanence, and that the truth of impermanence is a tap root of wisdom in this world, along with connection. Wisdom and the wisdom of connection and the wisdom of impermanence together, to me, make up the first fold of the Eightfold Path. But we have to be in relationship to grieving in order to tolerate impermanence, because because we're connected to all the things that are constantly changing, and it causes us loss and grief. So I wanted to just give us a tiny bit of time today, individually, if you'd like. I mean, if you'd like, you can also just sit zazen for a couple minutes, but just to take a few minutes, either just to contemplate or maybe even to write something down or type something in your computer. Like, what are the losses that are alive for you right now? And one of the things we also talked about in the SEV gathering was, a skill around grief is to be spacious. Grieving requires spaciousness. And not only like of time and energy, which it definitely does, but also of, I think it's important to be spacious with what we call a loss or what we call a grief. And to start to welcome in the things that we were maybe told we weren't supposed to be feeling. I can say this as, as our daughter went off to college, this is for me is such a living example that there's, it's positive to send your kid off to college and for them to be capable of doing that. And, we want them to grow. It's full of loss though. And it's so complicated. You're like happy and grieving at the same time. And it's like, oh, but again, like there's the capacity potential, Can I tolerate that? Can I be grieving and joyful at the same time? Yes. Often, yes. Often that's what we are, Or when someone we love dies, we're loving them. We can be joyfully remembering them and feeling them in our heart and grieving their presence, And I was thinking how at Stone Creek, the building is changing. It's already changed, the building. We can, in our Sangha alone, we could already be grieving like that we can't come together in person, that things aren't the way that we remember or we're used to. That building is changing, and even if it's something that's totally desirable and wanted and good, there's still loss in it, and can we open to that? And Charlie and I are moving next summer, and I feel like in our Sangha, I'm sure that there's a lot of, I'm not assuming it's all bad. Some people might be like, oh, that's relieving. And some people might be excited about who's coming, and some people might be feeling sad or confused or angry, and that's all there too, So I wonder if we could just take 5 minutes to just turn the light inward and see for yourself what losses are there for you this morning, right now. Which ones are you working with? What are the ones that you have that other people recognize? And what are the ones that you have that other people maybe can't see? And are there even some that maybe you couldn't see yourself until taking the time to look? So I'll just give us a few minutes to do that. And if you, again, if you like, you could write something, or you could just think about it, or you could just sit zazen. Okay. And there's more. We'll come back together after that. Okay, I'm going to ring a bell. And now for the next couple minutes, let's see, I'm going to try this. If you would like, so we have options. You can opt in to being in a dyad with somebody else, to just share not everything, but share what you feel comfortable sharing, or what was brought up for you. Or you can just nod and just continue kind of sitting or contemplating for the next 5 minutes. So to do that, I put in the chat, if you would like to opt in to meeting with somebody else, and if there's 2 people on your screen, that's okay. I could put you with another person just so we get to do this a little bit with one another, if we'd like to this morning. You can click on participants, go to your name, go to the right-hand side where it says more, and there's a down arrow. Click on that, then click on rename. And then your name as it is will be in a window, and it's highlighted in blue. And then just bring your cursor over there to the front of your name and put a, I don't know what, let's put a, just a 1 in front of your name, 1 space. Okay, so here I've done that. And then because if you rename yourself like that, your name will pop to the top of the list, and I can see that you want to. And if it really doesn't work, you can just kind of wave. Here, I'm going to go to gallery view. Jisho, do you want a 1 in front of your name?
My participants button doesn't give me all those wonderful things, so I guess I'll just stay here.
Or I can just put you in a room if you'd like to.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else unable to? Barry? Okay. Everybody else? Okay. I kind of see this. Just try not to rename yourself just the number 1, because the other person won't be able then to see your name. But it's okay if you do. You can just introduce yourself when you're there. Okay, let's see. Oh, it's a little tricky, because some people, if you can you put it at the front of your name? Because then your name just goes to the top of the list. And then I can, that way I can not include the folks who'd rather just sit quietly. Okay, I'm gonna start to do this. And then again, if you like to be in a breakout room for just a few minutes with one other person, let me know. You could also send that in the chat, and I'll try to do that.
Sarah?
Yes.
I was having technical issues and I didn't hear your directions. I'm sorry.
That's okay. If you'd like to be in a breakout room, you can just let me know, either by putting a 1 in front of your name, or
Okay.
telling me, or if you'd like to just sit quietly for 5 minutes, that's totally an option as well.
Okay, so I'll do the sitting quietly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
Yep.
Hello?
Oh, wait. Let me see. Now I need to assign G-Show. Oh, no, that's not what I do. I want to... I want to assign G-Show to...
If you have an odd number, that's all right. I'll sit quietly, quite happily.
I'm trying right now, G-Show, to put you in a room. Just one. Sorry, Annette, I'm having technical difficulties. I'm going to try one more time to get you in. How do I let me do that? Okay. Okay, I think Annette, if you go back into room 6 now, you and Jisho will be there.
How do I go back into 6?
Sorry, this has worked in the past. Let's see.
Is it because my number 1 is too close to my name?
No.
No.
Let me see if I can do it here, Annette. Nope.
Oh. I can just call Jisho on the phone.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's totally more. This is fine. I'll go back to sitting quietly.
If somewhere, Annette, it looks like you're still assigned to room 6.
Okay. I just don't know how to get there.
Back there. Oh, I got it. Here we go. Move to. No, I want to move to room 6. Oops, did I move somewhere else? No, sorry. Okay, you can call Jisho.
Yeah, I'm surprised you get as far as you do. No. 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 It's okay.
And for those in the main room, we'll come back together in about 2 minutes. welcome back. And sorry both to Jisho and Annette for my technical difficulties. I will do some investigating of how I can continue to work with them once they're created. So I'm hoping that we can have time to hear from one another. But the last thing I did want to share from that talk is that there is a prophecy of the eighth fire. So there are people of the eighth fire. So if the people, which maybe it meant the Anishinaabe in the beginning, but it means all the beings can figure out, can turn around and look backwards and be clear and move forward skillfully and with great courage. There is a time of tremendous wisdom that comes now if we can choose that path of life. So I wanted to let you know that's also part of that teaching. So please, that's the end of my talk. Thank you for bearing with me with the experimentation of interactive stuff. And please, if you have something that you want to share or something that's stirring, please go ahead.
I know I'm not supposed to talk, but I just want to say that I think the Industrial Revolution had a big, impact on how people, how we got to where we were.
Where we are.
I don't know if you read Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Things like that, where people became more technologically advanced, I think really made a huge difference on how people perceive the world and the relationship to it.
Thanks, Holly. And I there's two things there. Or do you? Oh, it's everybody's like popping around. The first thing is to bring some compassionate attention to the feeling that you have that you're not supposed to talk, which I'd really like to do, because I think that there's something so different between as a Sangha and as a community opening to let's be aware of like who gets to talk and who doesn't, and how often and how not often, and with the actually this is kind of a wisdom inquiry, right? Like who's here whose voice doesn't often get to be heard. I think I see you as somebody who's comfortable talking in a group, right? You, among other folks, have that, I'm comfortable talking in a group, generally speaking. Depends on the circumstances, but certainly at Stone Creek, right? So we are people that our voices are heard, So but do you know what I mean? There's a little spin there that's important, that's different. It's not that you're not supposed to. It's that what happens when there's the question of like, well, yeah, what voices are not heard and how do we make room for them? So just want to offer that. And also, yeah, like, of course, the Industrial Revolution, like, fucked everything up, but I think it's also, but it's like chicken and egg, though. Like, how do we get to an Industrial Revolution? There are ways of thinking, there's ways of thinking that lead to, they're brilliant. We had this experience this summer. We went with we were bringing our daughter to college, and our son is, he's kind of fascinated by guns and bombs and warfare and stuff like that. We don't do a lot to support it. That some of it's archetypal. I think he's interested in power, right? Like he's a 9-year-old boy, and very boy identified boy. And we went with him to the Intrepid, which is this aircraft carrier in New York City, which I remember doing when I was a kid, which is like both like, it's very impressive. Like, has anyone been there or been on an aircraft carrier? I mean, it's like, holy crap, like human beings do these things, right? And then on the thing, there's also a space shuttle. Yeah, like, which is another, like, holy crap, human beings can do this, right? And we're walking around, there's a sort of multimedia enactment of when it was bombed by kamikaze warriors in the Second World War, and when you're sitting in the place where these kamikaze, and warriors had smashed into the deck of the thing and of the aircraft carrier, and I'm like crying. I'm sitting there crying. While they're doing the reenactment, and everyone's like, "Go America!" and I'm like, there were kamikaze warriors. These were babies. These were somebody's babies. These were young men who were just really deluded, and the powers around them use them for their delusion and their own delusion, and then everybody else who died. Anyway, I was just feeling the whole thing. Like we said to our son, like, we can go here. You're gonna have to like endure mom's commentary. But one of the things that happened, sorry, this is a long-winded thing, but one of the things that happened to me while I was there, it was a sort of a similar thing where I was like, what if after World War II, we all of the money and human ingenuity and brilliance and effort and material goods and stuff and infrastructure and systems of that we put toward the military were put toward climate crisis then, like in the 50s, which, there was some inkling this was coming even then. Like, what if all those years, like, what if you could graduate from high school, like all the kids I know who joined the military, they couldn't afford college. They're not warmongering people. They went into the military because they wanted an education and a job training, like very practically. There's probably everyone here knows folks like that, or that was your situation, right? Like, what if we had like climate corps, instead of like death and destruction corps? And that to be in the service meant that, or something, I just could feel it in my heart. Like, what if we had taken a different direction there than putting all of this effort and money and resources and whole people's lives into figuring out how to destroy one another? Yeah, and maybe that sounds naive, but I feel like it's worth asking and feeling. And could we now, Could we do that? Like the Green New Deal, like, is that idealistic, or is it like, I don't know, do you want to live? Like, Mars doesn't look so inviting, neither does the moon. Like what is the option? It seems pragmatic. Okay, wow, that was a lot for me. Somebody else want to talk?
Oh, the only thing we have is now, in my view. It's interesting to consider what ifs. There's a really fascinating article in the Sonoma County Gazette that just came out October 1st about Chinese people in Sonoma County. It's incredible. Chinese people came over here to work in the gold rush and then build the railroads in the late 1800s. And there were Chinatowns in Sebastopol and Sonoma County and Santa Rosa. And because of white supremacy, they basically were driven out. And there's stories of the newspaper in Petaluma, everyone in the culture in the county basically against the Chinese. It's incredible to read, like, how could that have happened? And the only thing you can conclude is that, our hearts have opened, and somehow as a people, we've begun to love more, and that our ancestors, when they came to this land, drove out the natives. They drove out the Chinese who built the railroad and had businesses, and it's happened over and over. It's an incredible tale.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. I'm just going to quickly respond to Tomasa. It's an important story to know, right? If we live here, it's important to know that story. Like the total destruction of the Chinatown and what is now the CVS in downtown Sebastopol. That whole region was like a Chinatown, and then also to consider, like, it's not all of our ancestors. Yeah, like we have a myriad ancestors as a group of people, even just the ones that we can see on the call today, right? So not all of our ancestors are European even. and also like who are our ancestors, and do we know, and can we look into the stories, and what did they participate in, and yeah, so we only do have the now, but we also have the everything in the now that is what came before. And also we have the everything in the now that is what is to come. Like it is here, actually. The seeds of it are here. And I think that's why we refer to the three times so often in our tradition to be accountable to. Steve, please go ahead.
Okay, I guess I agree with all of the what people see and what has happened. I'm just not quite as sure that the good nature of humanity is really there. In that, from my own studies, it predates the Industrial Revolution. It's a question of too many people and too few resources, and when that happens, people start taking each other apart. Which is what happened in many primitive cultures, where they, they ate up all everything that was worth eating, and then killed each other off. And it's a sad aspect of our monkey brain that functions that way. And we have to, if we're going to move forward, there's too many of us right now, and if we're going to move forward and preserve humanity, we have to both we have to change our way, and it's not as simple as saying, well, we can live together. We really have to really rethink who we are as human beings, and the Zen philosophy helps me do that, and helps keep me somewhat sane. Because when we're talking about grief and loss, it's just the older you get, the more grief and loss there is. And I won't even get into that in my own life, but it's just looking at the broader picture. It's really very sad. It's really hard to have hope, but we have something we just have to cling on to.
Thank you. Yeah. Right, like what, this is a question that I think is very alive for me. Like, what does Zen offer that supports us to do something different?
Yeah.
And I think it's both like collective, it's a big scale, but it's also, but knowing like that big, whatever we call the big scale, it's a bunch of tiny people making up making up history, making up these big movements. And yeah, there might be something in our nature. I can think of this. One time we were watching these chimpanzees, and they were just beating the crap out of a squirrel. So painful. And everybody got hooped up and into it, and I was like, wow, that just reminds me of people. And we've been around for a while. And thousands of years ago, people had more sophisticated, maybe not in terms of material technology, but more sophisticated ways of engaging with themselves and the environment around them, and so can we be humble enough to learn from those ways of being?
One of the things that was different about where we live right now before Western civilization invaded it was that they had lots of resources. This was a very plentiful place to live. Yeah. And it wasn't hard to create a society that was more balanced with nature, which is different than in other parts of the world and different now everywhere.
Yeah. We live in a place of natural abundance, even with the impacts of climate crisis that are happening. Anyway, as we all know, this is...
Thank you so much. Could you say some more about your idea of our task now being to give voice to the grief? That's different from saying, oh, we have to turn it around, we have to change things. Just the idea of our main task now to voice the grief.
I know we've talked about this, Myozen, that there's a lot of people. So Kriti Kanko is one person who teaches about this, the role of grief in skillfully addressing, I should say, ecological disaster. So it's like, it's not, so I think we think of grief as so debilitating, or at least I was taught grief is like be careful of grief. If you walk down that path, you're just going to be a puddle on the floor and you'll never get up. It's like, but actually reframing our understanding of like grief, to feel the pain of stuff actually as strength to move forward in wisdom. And there's a beautiful article. This is what I know that we've talked about before, Myozen, is an article called Here at the End of the World by Joan Sutherland, which I'm sure I've mentioned before. I really recommend it. I think it's in Lions Roar, and you can find it online now. Sorry, I don't have the link with me right now. Oh, I might actually. And she talks about this, like grief as a skill that we need to. Oh, I do have it. I'll stick it in here for those who are interested. As you know, in practice, Joan Sutherland is. I don't know her personally, but she's a Zen teacher. And I feel like she says it so beautifully. So I almost want to be like, just look at her article. It's so beautiful. Like, yeah, this is a strength. This is a capacity. This is a skillfulness. This is a wisdom. Grief is a wisdom practice. She also says grief is a Buddha. Grief is a Buddha that we need to reckon with. Not so that we fall apart, but so that we have the strength to change and actually do something that is effective. Okay. Barry, did you want to say something briefly before we get? And Donna, maybe I saw your hand too.
Yeah, maybe.
Go ahead, Barry.
Sorry.
After you, Donna.
Okay. I think that part of the problem is the suppression of grief for sure, because I know in my family, we didn't talk about it. We cried, got over it, and we're done. And many of us didn't cry. And I even have that issue myself. But to me also, some of the, I think being in touch with nature is one of the things that we need to do. And I know for myself, I can now see it changing. And maybe it's because my life's been long enough, and that makes me grieve, but it also gives me joy at the same time. And I need both. And I think that being with people, and the pandemic has certainly not allowed us to do that, to be in touch, to be in person, is so key, as well as our spiritual side, which is our practice together. I'm also reading a book right now, Talking with Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers. And it's very interesting about the nature of people and how we misunderstand each other. And one of the things is to say that we usually look on the bright side and think that people are doing good or being good or talking good. That's one of the barriers that we can have to understanding other people. So I think conversations like we're having today are so important. So that's all. I think grief is, I know in our work in your group that you and Chris led, where we're talking about, we talk about grief a lot. We delve right into it. We hit it head on. It's so difficult. It is so draining, but it also is so enlightening, and at times, I don't know, joyful. It's certainly powerful. I don't know what I said, but that's enough.
Thank you so much, Donna. Really appreciating that. Yeah. And then Barry, do you have one last thing?
Sure. I'll just say a couple of quick things. One is I feel I need to say that I don't think violence is inherent in humanity. I think it's prevalent. I think it's prevalent because we have complex societies, and we have the three poisons to contend with, and that can take us down that road. But you can find plenty of examples of indigenous peoples. I'll just throw out one, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, who live in a very harsh environment, and they spend 2.5 days in subsistence activity. They haven't been at war with anyone ever. But I think one of the really key things, and this is where it relates back to grief for me, is that, you need ritual, you need community practices that help us deal with the fact that we are acquisitive beings, that we make poor choices, that we don't think broadly. And that's where I feel we're unraveling as a culture. I'm not sure we had very good ones of those to start with, but the ones that we have are really collectively coming apart at the seam. That's why things like this braiding sweetgrass and that wisdom, I think, are so important for us to listen to, because that is that kind of wisdom. It's the wisdom of not just an individual, but a collective that have been dealing with living in full contact with nature for hundreds of years. And I think we've been in denial of our relationship with nature now for hundreds of years after the Industrial Revolution. So that's all I need to say, I think. But that last fact gives me a tremendous amount of grief. I think that has created untold suffering on top of suffering for our particular society and the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all very much. See, there's a wisdom right here, sewn through our Sangha, when we meet each other. Yeah, and Kriti Kanko also talks about that, and I think she's a part of creating ritual. How do we, and so it's not just grieving individually, but finding ways to come together and meaningfully and also comfortably, right? People get all squirmy if we talk about grieving together. But to get comfortable and fluent and easeful with coming together to grieve, and to do that in ways that are empowering and are engaging. Yeah. Thank you all very much for staying with this. I'll put the closing chat in the chat. For great Bodhisattva vows, beings
are numberless.
I vow delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way